Okay, music, my voice. Alrighty, let's jump in here. So as I said, weirdly that door being open just bothers me. I'm just gonna close that and then we're gonna start. But like I said on Wednesday, we're in a slightly awkward spot. I mean, we only have 3 slides left talking about work, which, I don't know how long it'll take. I mean, if you know me, I can make 3 slides last if I absolutely have to, but I've done it before. There's not enough time, I think, because obviously the exam's on Wednesday, and I want to give Monday, that time for Q&A and all of that stuff that we do, right, and to show you some example questions again. So I don't think I have time to start a new unit, and definitely the upcoming units are a little bit denser. So we're going to end probably with these 3 slides, and then, we can do questions today, or we can come back on Monday. I'm not quite prepared to show you practice questions today, but we can definitely do that on Monday and take more questions. And I have to look at the exam over the weekend and see, what the outline of it is going to be, because I've shifted things around so much this term, because my startup with all the stuff I added from Twangy took a lot longer than it usually does. So for today, wherever we get with these kind of 3 slides, I guess we just kind of leave it there rather than try. I could, and I am prepared to, if necessary, jam in the unit on crime, but I don't want to push too hard on it, and I want to give that particular topic a little bit of room to breathe as well. So we're going to try and move into the back third of the course with lots of material to look at, and it should be kind of fast-paced and interesting. And it's an interesting exercise for me because this is the class I've been teaching the longest. I started teaching this class in 2015, so it's been almost 10 years. Which I know you're like, oh, we don't care, but whatever. I'm going to tell you the story. What's interesting is that there's a lot of when you start teaching a class, sometimes you feel like you have to pad out the runtime a little bit. So there's a lot of extra material, and some of it has just hung around for years. And so as I've gone through this class, and I feel like I have too much material, I'm paring stuff back and taking out stuff that I put in the first year that I taught the class, where I'm now why is this still here? And I've just kind of left it in, and now I'm now that you're getting the most condensed and efficient version of this class in some ways, as I just kind of pare stuff back that I think is less important than it was, or maybe is increasingly out of date, right? Because a lot of it's happened since 2015. So anyway, that's to say, the back half of the class is going to be me going through all of the PowerPoints beforehand and being no, yes, no, and giving you a really distilled and really, really up-to-date version of things. So I apologize that we're a little bit behind in the class. I feel bad about it. I want to make sure we get through all of the interesting stuff, and I especially want to make sure we get to the stuff on mental health, because it matters to me a great deal, and so does the stuff on sex and religion and all that. So we'll start on that after, I guess on Friday of next week, and I'm going to blitz through as much of it. And yeah, I'm going to go out and take out a lot of the less relevant stuff that just kind of has stayed over time. It's always fun for me to go back. If I look at the slides, because I keep everything, I'm a digital hoarder, and I go back and I look at the slides from the first time I taught the class, it is hilariously bad. How anyone ever enjoyed that class, I'll never know. Okay, any questions before we start though? Midterm is same format, 5 short answer questions, and all of that fun stuff. No? Yeah, questions.
So will our second midterm, will we be tested on the crime topic?
No.
Okay.
No. Not unless I decide today I have a mini stroke and I decide to throw it in there. But no, it'll be, what did we get? Education, work, and family, I think it's the 3 that we covered. Yeah, so that'll be what's on the exam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries. I promise I won't make you learn things on your own. I'm not mean. I could be. Should certainly bring down the average. It's like, here's a topic you've seen no information on. Go. Anyway, apparently some professors did that. Some students have been like, do we have to learn this unit on our own? And I'm like, no, that sounds crazy. Why would anyone do that? But who knows? Okay. So we got a couple of slides left here. Okay, so one of the big kinds of debates that we increasingly see about education is, what is its purpose? And we saw this with the Gen X data, right? As we have moved into this era of the credential, and Postman at the end of his life talked about this. So this book came out, The End of Education. It's a really interesting one. Now I guess feels a little dated too, but really interesting book where he talks about what is the value of education. And this is a theme that has, since the late 90s, early 2000s, really kind of been on people's minds, especially in the social sciences and the humanities. The social science and the humanities have gone into a sort of crisis, right? People are doing fewer degrees in the social sciences and the humanities because where, maybe an English degree or a degree in sociology used to offer you sort of pathways into life, increasingly, right, as a credential, their skills are less transferable. So in a lot of cases, we've preferred to go to things that are in university that are fundamentally vocational, right? So teaching is a big one, nursing, engineering, and some of the sciences, I will fight the sneeze. I will not let it win. I don't know why. Why fight the sneeze? Fundamentally things that have direct kind of job correlates have been much more popular. And a lot of the emphasis that we've seen from government has been on, okay, let's support those programs where there's a direct kind of job pathway, out of that program. So engineering obviously has come to, has gained a lot of support from the government, even in some cases as engineering degrees have become less valuable with a lot more global competition. The shift and the kind of crisis in the humanities in particular has been about that Gen X shift, right? That shift that Gen X made where they became more materialistic and education became more about getting a great job or material things rather than developing a consistent or a meaningful philosophy of life. That's essentially what Postman's kind of talking about, right? It used to be that you went to university to educate yourself, to become part of something better, to better yourself, and you could bring that better self, that smarter self, that more critical thinker self, back into your community, and hopefully, use what you've learned to make that community better as well. But increasingly what Postman says, and one of the reasons we're in a kind of crisis in education, and while things may look rosy on the surface, actually we're all facing problems of declining enrollment and declining interest in a lot of post-secondary fields. For Postman, education's all about making workers. And I think this has kind of followed through from Postman onto other commentators who have talked about this as well. It's just about making workers, right? It's about getting a credential, and it lacks what he says is a fundamental mythos behind it. Like, what is the reason for, becoming educated? Especially if you think about the liberal arts, right? The liberal arts, what are the liberal arts, and why would anyone, participate in the liberal arts if it's just about learning about, some long dead white guys and what books they wrote and what ideas they had to say? What are the purposes of these? What is the purpose of something, say, like critical thinking if it doesn't shift into, credentials of some kind? And I mean, he says that, there were a few mythoses in the past that worked. One of them was like, do something for your country, especially during the Cold War, that your education was about beating the dirty commies, right? Or building, helping build your community, your country for the betterment of humanity. And that sort of fell apart after the Cold War. And today, there is no fundamental myth. Yeah, Mia.
So Postman is saying that this shift into credentialism, going to nursing and teaching, is ultimately a bad thing?
Well, it is a bad thing, especially in those, yes, because basically it's like all you do in university is get credentials to get a job, right? It's not about learning anything. It's not about, really, bettering yourself or becoming a better critical thinker or any of those things. It's just about getting a credential so that you can earn a paycheck. And what he says is that's not very inspiring, right? And you kind of are starting to see the breakdown of this. You're seeing it first amongst young men. Young men are opting out increasingly of the university system in a lot of cases. And we see this, we talked about the proportions of people graduating with post-secondary degrees, right? For women, it's a lot more. Men are increasingly kind of opting out of college education, and those proportions have shifted massively. And so there is this sort of crisis, and it hits the humanities and social sciences first, but it's coming across kind of different parts of the university as well. Sorry, does that answer your question, Mia?
Well, it doesn't seem like we are really like getting less people interested in education. It almost feels more like you have to get this education because no job will take you without like a bachelor's.
Mm-hmm. We are increasingly though, we're seeing big shifts. If people can't get into, say, engineering, science, or something like that, they don't go into anything, right? They just fall out of the system. It's especially true for young men. Now, Postman puts it down to why do you get an education? If it's just to get a job, he doesn't think that that's a good enough reason, right? To just be a widget in the great machine of capitalism isn't a very inspiring story for him. And it's an argument, but sorry, have I answered your question now? Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to always make sure. Okay, on the other side of the spectrum, right, on the sort of more technocratic side, you have the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So the OECD, right, is a group of the most developed economies in the world, and basically noticing as well a sort of problem with young people in the workforce, and especially that access to the workforce after getting out of school. The OECD has put out, they put this out about 10 years ago, so it's getting a little bit long in the tooth now. But they had 4 recommendations basically for what you should do in terms of employment policies for young people to help them get into the workforce more easily. Okay, so these 4 are: number 1, develop and enhance job search assistance programs. One of the things that remains true today is that the job search market is kind of a mess, right? To find a job is rather difficult. Not like getting the job, but finding jobs that you're interested in, right? And it is very much divided between a whole bunch of private sector sort of companies that all have their own agendas and have their own kind of ways of doing things, right? So you've got your Indeeds, you've got your LinkedIns. I have a LinkedIn account and I still have never figured out what LinkedIn is for, but that's me and social networks in general. I'm confused by them. I think I once signed up for Snapchat and almost immediately concluded I didn't understand what was happening, and I ran away like a scared person. I was just like, scary, run away. This doesn't make sense to me. My slightly Gen X brain makes no sense of Snapchat. Anyway. Right, you have all of these different social media apps that are all and kind of job posting apps that are all kind of on their own agenda. They all post things slightly differently. And this, essentially what the OECD said, and I think this is still correct, is that it makes the job market very opaque, right? It makes it very hard if you are a young person looking for a job in a particular field to find those jobs, because they may be listed on Indeed, they may be listed on LinkedIn, they might be listed on the company's website. Finding these jobs is very difficult. So one of the things that the OECD suggested would help young people find the jobs that are available a lot more easily, right? Better than walking through an industrial park and handing out resumes, was basically, or figuring out, which companies were hiring and which ones you have to apply on which website, all of these sorts of things, that governments should step in and develop these sort of job search assistance programs, right? Basically, a job board, right? Or something where the government would gather, I don't know if it would be some government agency, would gather all of the job postings together, and companies would be incentivized to post their jobs, in this kind of central database, so that if you were, a young person just out of school, you could log onto it or go into a help center and, someone could help you navigate through and find the jobs that are in your field and that match your interests, right? Because one of the big problems that young people do face is that if they're not able to find a job that's in their interest, they go into that kind of service, low tier of the service industry as a kind of placeholder. And that can leave them in this position of churning through these sort of McJobs and making their resumes worse as they try to find, that job, that first job for themselves. Maybe they end up at Enterprise Rent-A-Car for 3 years, who knows? And life is not that fun, right? And I can see this because I remember it was, again, it was back a few moons ago, but it was difficult for me to find a job when I was just out of university because where do you even look, right? I went to job fairs, I went to all these places, but there was no transparency in the market. So number one is transparency. A transparent job market, the OECD says, would help young people find jobs that match their skills and interests. Okay, so number two, did I take my pen out? I did, here it is. Number two, because I like to circle things and mark things off. Number two, temporary social safety net measures. So one of the things that the OECD is really critical of is what I was just talking about, right? That people falling into that lower tier of the service industry, the McJob kind of part of the universe. So what they suggest is, and actually this is a really, it would never happen because no government is ever going to do this. It's actually a really provocative, I think, sort of way of thinking about it. To help young people get into the job market, they say put in place temporary social safety net measures, essentially something almost like employment insurance for people who've never been employed, right, but are coming out of school. And now the OECD recommended up to a year, somewhere between 6 months and a year of sort of employment benefits for people finishing, post-secondary degrees in particular. Now, why? So one of the things that tends to be true, right? People graduate and they need a job, right? And so what do? They find the first job that works, and often that is one of these, low-tier service sector jobs. Okay, so a couple of things are true. Friday. Relating to this. I got 2 more classes to do after this. It's gonna go great. Okay, so sorry, I'm totally lost my train of thought on my own joke. I've derailed myself on the railway of jokes. The metaphor is broken down. Okay, so you want to keep people from getting into that lower tier of the job market. Why? A, because obviously the jobs stink. People go through that churn, right? They get frustrated, they quit jobs, they have to find another job right away. It also is considerably more difficult to apply for jobs once you have a job. Now, I know this seems counterintuitive, but it's a time thing, right? When you have a full-time job or even a part-time job, suddenly your hours are more constrained. There's less time in the day to look for work, right? So you may not have the time to go, looking through job boards or, meeting with, headhunters, whatever it happens to be. There are real limitations to, how much time you have. I just experienced this week, right? So the Department of Sociology is opening up a job for a tenure track teaching professor, because I've been on contract. I really love the tenure track thing. That would be great. And honestly, the time it took me to do all the application process is the thing that's been ruining my life for the last week and a half. Writing, updating my CV, cover letters, teaching statements, and gathering all the materials. It was probably about 20 hours of work just to apply for a job. So it's much harder to apply for a job once you're in one, right? So the OECD is like, well, let's put people on EI or something equivalent of employment insurance for a 6 to 12 month period. Basically allowing them to find a job that matches their skills and interests rather than throwing them into the McJob cycle, having them have difficulty applying for jobs or having to sneak around to do job interviews, between shifts or whatever it happens to be. Let's just make it a lot easier so that they find the job that they want right away. right? Rather than taking a bunch of jobs they don't want that are bad and that make them look unreliable in the short term. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, oops, that didn't go well. Now I must erase. It bothers me that I scribbled over something. Number 3 is essentially a technocratic sort of, yeah, I know, whisper. Okay, number 3 is a technocratic kind of solution. So basically it's, and this is actually becoming increasingly the case. And so it's actually really sort of interesting, and it's weird because, well, you might not think it, the war in Ukraine has really brought home how problematic this is, in the West in particular. Okay, so developing and enhancing apprenticeship and other vocational education and training. All right, so really what the OECD has in mind here is one thing, and then we can kind of spin that one thing off into another. So one of the things that's tended to happen in universities is universities were really good at sort of generalist degrees, right? So you think of the Bachelor of Arts, I'm really sorry if that's you, or the BSc, which is most of the rest of you that aren't Bachelor of Arts, like the general Bachelor of Arts, general Bachelor of Science, they're sort of generalist degrees. They don't, however, have a direct kind of road into work, right? They don't have a direct road into a particular job. And so what happens, and I know I've seen this, I've now been around, I've been teaching for 10 years, I've had students come back, ask for letters 5 years later, all these sorts of things. People, I had one super smart, like one of the smartest students I ever had, and got out and, with her Bachelor of Arts and was working as a dental assistant, like not a dental assistant, but like the secretary in a dental office, and hated every minute of it. And went back and became a teacher, and she's doing great now. But there was no direct path out of those generalist degrees into the workforce. So apprenticeships, obviously in the trades, right, have a direct job path, right? If you're a plumber, you are going to plumb a plumbed thing. I like that sentence. I like it a lot. If you are a carpenter, you're going to carpent a carpented thing. That doesn't work as well. You're going to do things with wood, right? If you're a welder, you're going to weld a thing that needs welding, right? These all have kind of distinct paths. Trades are very good that way in, you move into jobs that are specific to, the training that you have. So there's no kind of question. It's like, well, what kind of job should I apply for out of my Bachelor of Arts? It's like, I have a plumbing ticket. I guess I will be a plumber, right? All of these sorts of things. Okay. The other one is vocational paths. And more vocational education programs. So vocational education programs are slightly more kind of in the white collar range typically, but they're the same sort of thing as an apprenticeship, right? You're working towards a particular, a particular job in your training, right? So think of this as, and universities do a mix of kind of generalist degrees and vocational, but teaching and nursing, right, are two of the big vocational paths. And engineering as well. So teaching, engineering, nursing are all vocational paths, right? Because you know what kind of job you're coming out with at the end of the day, at least in theory, right? You're going to work with kids if you're a teacher. If you're an engineer, you will engineer some stuff and go work for engineering companies. A nurse, right, you will be a healthcare practitioner. Medicine of all kinds. Pharmacy, right, is a vocational path, a really good one. These are all vocational paths. And basically what the OECD says is that we need to develop more vocational paths so that these degrees that we're putting people in, if we're saying you need a credential to move into the kind of post-industrial economy, then we need to have a more direct output so that people, when they're coming out, already have a career path kind of built into the education, and they come with specific skills that are useful in the workplace, right? Rather than just coming out with a generalist degree, and it's like, okay, you're kind of smart, I bet you can wash cars. Can you tell how bitter I am about this experience in my life? Oh, like 40 years from now, I'm still gonna be talking about this, I swear. Okay, so the other thing that's happened, and where I mentioned the war in Ukraine, especially on the apprenticeship side and the side of people who work in things like manufacturing. One of the things that's been brought home by this is weird, and I spend way too much time thinking about this. In the production of weapons, Russia is actually outproducing the West, which is really funny, given that Russia's economy is something like 1/40th the size of all the Western economies. Why? Because Russia still has a lot of this, right? They still train a lot of people, particularly in manufacturing, engineering manufacturing. Weirdly enough, Russia graduates as many people in engineering as the United States does, despite having about half the population. And a lot of people, and they train a lot of people in heavy manufacturing. So this is something that the West has sort of abandoned, but now it's becoming increasingly clear that if you need to scale up manufacturing, we don't have the skilled people to do it. They're all honestly, I've watched too much of this. YouTube is a trash heap of information on all these things. But they can't find anyone who knows how to make weapons in a weapons factory. They have to train them from scratch, which means the lead time is incredibly long. And this is true across the economy, right? The reason we couldn't get masks during COVID, we didn't have any people who knew how to operate the machines to make masks in North America. We had to outsource it to, China and other places who were like, well, we're gonna make masks, and when we have enough for ourselves, then we'll give you some. I remember trying to order masks on Amazon. I think I still have an order that was never delivered of masks that I paid for on Amazon that just never came. I'm still waiting. Any day now, I'm sure that's going to turn up. What the OECD has pointed out, we have a mismatch in skills in the economy. We have a lot of generalists with undergraduate degrees, not a lot of people who can make things, and not a lot of people who are trained in specific vocations. The other one, and this is one I know because I have a lot of friends who abandoned their souls and went into this field, is accounting. Sorry, accounting seems soulless to me because it's tiny numbers and tiny boxes that merges two of my great fears. Lots of tiny numbers and lots of tiny boxes. It's another vocational thing, right? A lot of people end up, taking accounting classes. Why? Because they're like, well, I really need a job, and I have my undergraduate degree, but now I need something where I'm actually going to get a job, and so they go do 2 more years as an accountant. And somewhere in the middle, I think you have to sacrifice your soul, because it sounds like a really boring job to me. But I mean, if your parents are accountants, I'm really sorry. I'm sure they're lovely people. Okay. Last one, and this one, I think is a little bit of a kind of what you might call DEI, inclusion or kind of social justice kind of focus. And this is, basically to develop special programs for people from lower socioeconomic status and disadvantaged groups to focus on technical and computer skills, right? So one of the big things, and this is stupid, and this is still true, you want to know what the number one thing, like if you look at Indeed, if you look at LinkedIn, the number one thing that employers look for in the resumes, it's really dumb. It's Microsoft Office. They might ask for specific proficiencies, usually in Word and Excel, right? These are and honestly, the number one thing, and this has been true, by the way, for about 20 years, that on almost every job posting, it's proficiency with Microsoft Office is one of those things. Now, most of you probably have some proficiency with Office because you've been using it for a long time. But you're in relatively privileged positions for the most part, right? You're relatively wealthy, you're at university, most of you have laptops. If you're not proficient with Word or Office, you're probably proficient with Google or Google Docs, Google's suite of things. I don't know. They're dead to me. I don't use them. I'm old school. I like my Office. Thank you very much, as you can tell by my death by PowerPoint approach to lecturing. So basically, you have a lot of kind of privilege here. Other people don't have it as much, and especially people from lower socioeconomic strata, especially those that don't own computers or have them at home, have a lot less proficiency with Office, right? And the basic kind of computer skills that you're going to need in an increasingly digital workforce. So the OECD basically said we should have basically training to help people gain these skills, learn Microsoft Office and all the other basic skills that you wouldn't have if you didn't have a computer at home, if you were only using a computer at school, or if you were only using a computer at the public library, or whatever it happens to be. It used to be a question of internet access. This is broadly evened out with smartphones. Almost everyone, even down all the way down the socioeconomic ladder, has access to the internet through smartphones. Almost everyone, not exactly everyone, but a lot of people. So that one has kind of evened out, but it's like the actual skills that come from having a computer and building it. And computers remain, thanks a lot, Steve Jobs and Apple, chronically too expensive. The prices on them are super inflated, and it's all Steve Jobs and Apple's fault. I really hate Apple, I'm sorry. All right, last slide. I told you I could make 3 slides last a long time. Yeah, I'm on.
So who would the OECD put the burden of
Government. On government, yeah. It would all be government programs to kind of even this out.
Is the government like required this?
The Canadian government, no. As far as I know, none of this was ever implemented, and certainly, in a sense, the Canadian government has had sort of aspects of this. They had a summer job search bank at one point, which I don't know if it's still active, which you could, oh my God, okay, this is how old I am, I'm sorry. In the early 2000s, you could go downtown to I think it was Canada Place, and they had an office where you could go in and you could like search for jobs, and someone would help you. It was really funny. You couldn't do it online from home, but you could do it at this place. So they've had versions of this, but it's never been a kind of, full-throated initiative. And the rest of them, like this, absolutely not. Like this is, I'm going to scribble on my slide and cross it off. Never has happened, and probably never will. Hi, Celine. Does it answer on my phone? Hello.
Hello?
Celine, how are you?
Oh.
You're talking to my class right now. I think Celine pocket dialed me.
I'm working. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
You called me during one of my lectures, and I answered it as a joke. Can I call you back in a couple of minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye. Celine is one of our grad students. She's calling me for money. That's why. Because I control the funds at the CCR. So, I swear, we're not having an affair, I guarantee it. Okay. So, you had a question? Did I answer your question? Yes. Government programs. Have they ever implemented it? Not really. No, it's never been something that's happened fully. Okay. I think I'm done with this slide. Am I done? Am I good? I'm so random today. I'm sorry. All right. Last slide for work. Okay, so one of the reasons the OECD is so strong on this, right? Why they think it's so important to help young people find work and work quickly is because long-term unemployment has really negative effects on people way down the road. So the number, and years down the road, like if you look 10 years down the road, there's still negative effects if you didn't have a job coming out of, if you're unemployed for a significant period of time. So the obvious one is lost wages. So you're not making money, right? You don't have a job coming out, you're not making money during that period, and that money is just gone. You can really never get it back. No matter how hard you try. I'm still trying to gain back all the lost wages I lost from being in grad school, and trust me, it's a losing battle. The more money I make, the more money disappears to taxes. I don't know why that is. It's really frustrating. Okay, 6 months of unemployment at 22 meant an 8% decrease in wages at 23, right? So if you were unemployed for 6 months when you're 22, so usual age where people graduate from school, it meant at 23 you're making 8% less. Even at 32, 33, so 10 years later, right, your wages would be 2 to 3% lower than otherwise. So it's not a huge number, but it still has an appreciable effect. And right, over time, you're just never quite caught up to people who didn't have that period. Yeah, Reg.
Is this more like for a job, like any type of employment, or just like jobs in your field?
This is like any kind of employment, right? But the more likely, if you're out of work for 6 months, it's again more likely that you're working in some kind of field that's not as closely related to what you're doing. But yeah, so a year of unemployment at 22 could have an impact between 13 and 22% lower wages up to 20 years later, right? So it could reduce your wages by up to a fifth if you were unemployed for a year. These are all stats of the UK. And obviously detrimental physical effects of early unemployment. You know, people who were unemployed for 6 months or more coming out of university report things like on, happiness surveys that they're less happy, that they have lower job satisfaction, lower wages, and worse health outcomes. I was gonna draw a heart. I don't think I can draw a heart on this screen while it shakes. I'm gonna try. That was terrible. Maybe I'm so mean because I have a malformed heart like the one I just drew. Heart disease, right? Heart disease, much higher rate of heart attack and strokes and other heart diseases as you enter middle age if you were unemployed. So that kind of stress of not having a job when you're young has long-term effects. You know, you're less happy, you have less job satisfaction, lower wages, and generally worse health outcomes over time. So, I mean, I guess if you're gonna do anything, you should probably get a job and not be unemployed if you can absolutely manage it, right? Even a marginal job is gonna be better than no job at all, especially if you get into, a couple months is not a big deal, but if you get into a year, right? A year where you're unemployed, that can have pretty detrimental effects long term. Okay. Oh, can I explain? Yes, I really should have had more question slides in here. I can go back. We have time. We have 12 minutes. No one wants to leave early, right? Everyone wants to be here. No. I'm kidding. Okay. I mean, essentially, what Postman says is during the Cold War, right, there was a sort of, you get educated because it helps your country, right? And there was a big kind of, it's hard, I think, for you to imagine because most of you were born now in the 2000s, a solid 10 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so you have no sort of reference point for what it was like to live in this world divided between the USSR and the United States, communism and capitalism. But during that time, right, it was seen as everyone's kind of duty to oppose communism and to oppose, all the trappings of communism, which meant building up things like the national economy, right? That the United States in particular, but Canada as well, and Britain should all be doing really, really well, so that we were ahead of the Soviets. We had to develop, technology, that was miles ahead of the Soviets to keep, so that we would win the Cold War, or at least not allow the Soviets to win the Cold War. When the Cold War kind of comes to and there's other weird things about this. I'll say this totally random because it's true. It seems like religion was also buoyed, like especially in the US, people remaining religious was also buoyed by the fact that communism existed, and we were not communists, and the communists were, atheists, so we couldn't be atheists. Because what happens, kind of starting right around 1991, I'm going to write 1991. When the Soviet Union collapses, is that irreligion starts to rise as well, right? So it's like we all have to believe in God because the communists don't. Oh, no more communists, no more God. And it's the same thing in kind of the argument that Postman's making, is that people went to school and had this kind of like, almost John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, kind of attitude about work. About work, about education, the education that led to work, and that kind of collapses after the Soviet Union, and then it becomes like, well, I guess I go to school to get a job. I too can be a accountant at some crappy accounting firm, or a really nice accounting firm. I'm trying to think of the nice ones, and I can't. Deloitte, right? You can be an accountant at Deloitte. It's not a very inspiring story. It's like, yes, I can work for 35 to 40 years until I get an ulcer and I'm forced to retire. And then I can drive a motorhome to Phoenix every winter. Yay, life. Yeah, maybe that sounds appealing to you. I'm sorry. That's actually, I think, the script for one of my nightmares is like driving a motorhome down to Phoenix every winter and golfing every day. I'm like, I think this might be hell. Phoenix might be hell. I'm sure if you're an NHL hockey player, you probably feel that way too. Anyway, so hopefully, I don't know if that helped. more questions. You just want to keep, you're not here, I bet. You're at home in your bed. You just want to keep your classmates here as long as possible. Kidding. So does Postman's fundamental myth refer to idealistic goal we believe can be achieved through education? Kind of. It's more like, what is the purpose of education, right? What is, the story about why you become educated? Is it just in service of, that dream of driving down to Phoenix every winter or working for a company or 5 companies for 40 years and then retiring and hopefully having a decent middle class life? Or is it about something more? And Postman thinks in the past, there were things like, discovering your identity, bettering your community, being in service of some greater cause. And usually, we're talking about, I can't draw I was going to write nation state, but it would be all squiggly, the nation state or something like that, right? Those were all things that were built into some view of why we got educated. And he suggests that in the post-Cold War period, it's all about the Benjamins, if you will. It's just about money. So, yes, sorry, I shouldn't sigh like that. I was reading my USRIs from a few years ago, and they're like, you should sigh less. And I'm like, I'm trying to catch my breath because I talk too fast. I don't know what you're talking about. All right, so that's it. Hey, we're only 7 minutes early, so I feel pretty good about the fact that I managed to stretch out 3 slides. I didn't stretch it out. That's what was on the slides for 43 minutes, and a few questions help a lot. All right, so Monday we're going to come back. I'm going to show you some practice questions. We're going to do some Q&A. Wednesday is the exam. Everyone's packing up. Can I answer this question? Was post-secondary important during the Cold War or just high school? Okay, sorry, can I answer this question? This is a fun question. Can I, because I'm going to tell you a very short story, which I used to have a slide about it, but I took it out as irrelevant content, but now I have to put it back in. And that is, Sputnik is, I think, 1952. Or, yeah, 1952. I think. Okay. So you're asking the question, was post-secondary always seen as important? It becomes really important in about 1952, right? Before then, there isn't as big a push. What happens is, in 1952, the Soviet Union launches the first orbital satellite called Sputnik. This actually surprised people in the West, because the West, as it does now, has this narrative that they are the pinnacle of society and the pinnacle of technology, and that basically no one will ever surpass them. And then when those dirty commies get to space first, everybody sort of freaks out. And what this does is it causes a sort of dual panic. Government is like, man, we need to invest a lot more in engineering, science, and math. Because clearly the Soviets, and I will say this about the Soviet Union, for all of its flaws, it had a tremendous education system. Especially in science, engineering, and math. And I mean, it's not for nothing that the rocket formula that we still use today to calculate how much fuel you need to get a rocket into orbit was developed in the Soviet Union. So the United States, the government puts a lot more stress on it, but there becomes this kind of social narrative about it as well, is we need to develop better technologies to beat the Soviets, right? This gets knocked up again a little bit when you get to 1957 and you get, the Soviets beating. So the Soviets will beat the U.S. into space a few times, right? They launch a dog into space. So the first mammal to go into space is a Soviet dog. And then Yuri Gagarin in 1957 becomes the first human being to go into space. And basically, this kickstarts in the West, this kind of we need to invest in post-secondary education, especially in the STEM fields, to keep up with the Soviets. So the answer to your question is yes. What about the alternative ways of living that are enticing millennials and Gen Z, such as a rejection of 9-to-5 living? Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit encapsulated right in the, if I go way back, if we look at way back, oh my God, way back, right here, right, in these kinds of stats, right, more freedom, people want way back, wow, way back, holy crap, what they want is not long hours. Nobody wants long hours in Gen Z and millennials. right? They want flexible hours. If I go back, even way backer, right? Flexible hours for Gen Z is considered quite important. For millennials, it's there as well. Yeah, there is and COVID kicks this up a little bit too, right? It was like, can I work from home? WFH. You know, and again, this is definitely a trend, but I did talk about this just way earlier in the course or in this kind of section. So yes, there are alternative ways of living that are enticing millennials and Gen Z. They want this. I will say employers are not liking this. It's causing a problem. And in particular, one of the things that work from home has done is it's massively declined productivity. Productivity for work from home employees can be down as much as 40%, right? Because it's like, all right, I did my one thing and now I'm going to do laundry for 6 hours. This is always my problem when I have work from home days is I'm like, but the laundry needs to be done. And my office is right next to the laundry room. So it's definitely there, but there's now a battle between like employers who are like, you're not very productive when you're at home. You're much more productive when you're in the office. And they're resistant to this particular thing. Okay, now I used 47 minutes. Now I feel even better about myself. Okay, why don't we leave it there? Come back on Monday. You can keep asking questions on Monday. I will discard my doodles. But yes, all fun. See you on Monday.